Grace Brown. Grace was born on March 20th, 1886. All Grace Brown ever wanted in life was to get married and start a family. She was really a good kid and a hard worker. Grace had brown hair and brown eyes. She was a very attractive girl. Seven days a week, Grace Brown did the chore. Feed the chicken, milk the cow, do the harvest. I'll bet you the food then was great. I would love to have tried it. Grace, who was also known as Billy, was said to be high-spirited. This is the Brown family farm. Picture taken around the turn of the century. When Grace lived here, she lived here with her 4 sisters, 4 brothers, 9 kids altogether. Gracie and her sisters used to run and play in the fields that we see here. Gracie was born to Minerva and Frank Brown. Minerva, as we see here. Frank Brown, Grace's dad, both hard-working farm people. Grace attended the Tellet Hill School, a one-room school building for children ages 5 through 16. We see Grace here at the top. The village of South Ocelot is located about a mile from Grace's farm. The village had one post office, a few stores, and a hotel. It also had a bandstand right in the middle of town. Local comedy shows and concerts would play there. At one of these concerts, Grace and her sisters were listening to a band, and that band played that song, "Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey?" Well, Grace went crazy when she heard the tune. Just got up, started dancing around and around and around and around and around, until her family and friends began calling her Billy. This is where Grace got her nickname, Billy.
One fine summer day, the sun was shining fine. The lady love of old Bill Bailey was hanging clothes on the line in her yard and weeping hard. She married a being old brakeman. That man threw her down, billowing like an old moon calf with a big gang hanging round. And to the crowd, she yelled out loud. She said, "Won't you come home, Bill Bailey? Won't you come home?" She moaned the whole day long. "I'll do the cooking, honey, I'll pay the rent. I know I've done you wrong. Don't you remember that rainy eve I put you out with nothing but a fine-tooth comb? I know I'm to blame, I feel ashamed. Bill Bailey, won't you please come home?"
After finishing school, Grace Brown went to work full-time on her family farm. But all this would change in the late autumn of 1904. Grace decided to move to Cortland. At first, Grace stayed at her sister's, but later going on her own. She had heard that there was a local company hiring, so in the late autumn of 1904, Grace Brown walked up the steps of the Gillette skirt factory. She was hired on the spot. Grace lived here at 7 Wheeler Street. Now this is what the house looked like in the year 1904. And this is the way it appears today. Grace rented a room in this house on the right-hand side in the back. This house was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Carrie Wheeler. Every morning, Grace would walk out that front door, across the street, down the sidewalk, turn right, and then go across the street again to the Gillette skirt factory, which was on the corner of Homer and Miller Street. One night, Grace returned to her room. A couple hours later, there was a knock at the front door. Chester Gillette was there to see her. Chester Gillette and Grace Brown were now seeing each other. You see, their relationship started while they were working at the Gillette skirt factory. At first, Grace rejected Chester's advances. But he was good-looking and charming, and after all, he was the nephew of the person who owned the factory. So for her, it would have been a good catch. Chester rented a room in this house at 17.5 East Main Street. The house is located 2 blocks from the Gillette skirt factory and 4 blocks from Grace's house. Chester's room was the window on the top left-hand side. He'd walk through this front door. The room where we see the fan in it, the window there, that was the actual room of Chester Gillette. Noah Gillette lived here at 20 West Court Street in Cortland. This is what the house looks like today. You see, Noah really liked Chester, and Chester was doing very good at the Gillette skirt factory. So now Chester was starting to become invited to private parties and dinner with his uncle Noah Gillette. At one of these occasions, Chester met a beautiful young high society lady named Harriet Benedict. Her father was a lawyer, and she was from one of the most richest families in the city. Chester and Harriet started to see each other. He would take her out to dinner and to dance. This led, local legends say that is, to a deep romantic involvement. Miss Harriet Benedict lived at 53 North Main Street in Cortland. This was the actual home of Harriet. Chester used to come knocking at that front door that we see there. It was now Christmas time, and Grace Brown bought Chester his Christmas present, a gold ring that cost her 2 weeks' pay. Chester gave Grace her present, a burnt wooden jewelry box he found on the street. Chester and Grace would still see each other on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and they would make love in the Wheeler house in the downstairs parlor. There was no doubt now Grace Brown was deeply in love with Chester Gillette. Gracie would hear rumors about Chester and Harriet Benedict and completely break down while she was working at the Gillette skirt factory. Things continued this way until an event occurred that would change the lives of Chester Gillette and Grace Brown forever. In the early spring of 1906, Grace Brown discovered she was pregnant. Grace decided at that time to quit her job at the Gillette skirt factory and return to the family farm. It was agreed by both Chester and Grace that she would wait at the farm and Chester would come and get her and they would go off to some far place and to be married. At least this is what Grace thought. So Grace returned to her family farm and waited for Chester to come and get her. Chester was relieved because Grace had returned to South Ocelot. He thought the problem of her being pregnant would just go away, but of course it never did. At nighttime, Grace Brown would go down to the family living room and write love letters to Chester Gillette. Grace was now almost 4 months pregnant. Grace was becoming scared, afraid, and some say suicidal. You see, if a woman were pregnant and unmarried in the year 1906, she would be considered highly immoral. Grace watched for Chester every day to come and get her and take her away. Sometimes she would lock herself in her room, not coming out for like weeks at a time. One time she was so sick she passed out right on her living room floor. Her mom came in and threatened to call the doctor. Grace wrote to Chester almost every day, sometimes twice a day, begging him to come and get her and take her away. Grace's last letter was written in this room that we see here. And this is the actual handwriting of Grace Brown. This letter is dated July 5th, 1906. You're inside the Brown family farm. Grace was saying in the letter goodbye to her family and friends, goodbye to her home. She was also saying, I wish I could die. I wish I could die. The letter would remain in the hearts of scholars, of teachers, of writers forever. At the request of her letters, Chester Gillette finally agreed to meet Grace. So they planned to meet in a place called the Ryder, which is about 12 miles north of South Ocelot. Chester brought along with him his suitcase, his Kodak camera, and his tennis racket.